Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. We've got some excellent discussion and hopefully enlightening some folks about some things that they may not know and hopefully connecting dots for those that may not have seen that apparent. So I'm Dee Dee Davis, Vice President, again, Informatics Conformance and Interoperability at the Sequoia Project. And what I'm going to be talking to you today is just a summary. I'm not sure what everyone knows about everything that's going on, so I'm going to kind of give you a breadcrumb trail in 15 minutes to connect those dots. So next slide, please. So we're going to cover the Sequoia project, our data usability work group, the data usability implementation guide that we've published, two versions of it, and a third one that's coming, and the data usability taking root community of practice. So those are the kind of four sections. Next slide. The Sequoia Project, for those that don't know, the background, the Sequoia Project was named that because Sequoia trees grow to their great heights because they have interconnected roots. The root systems are actually fairly shallow for the heights that they grow, and connected, they're stronger together. So wanted to throw that in. Next slide. The next slide. I'm still okay. There you go. Interoperability matters is kind of an umbrella. So a lot of people know us as the Recognized Coordinating Entity, the RCE. That's what I'm not talking about today. I'm talking about our Interoperability Matters initiative, which really tries to take national level issues, bring and convene stakeholders to really solve real world problems. If you go to the next slide, what we tried to do was launch them as our board and our membership prioritizes. So the first work group that was launched, there are seven, was information sharing work group. It was launched in 2019, and there are 30 healthcare organizations. So you kind of see how I've given you some of the breadcrumbs. I'm not going to read all those, but I'm just going to mention that data usability actually was formed in 2020. So we've been doing this for 6 years. And I'm grateful to have a lot of leadership and a lot of folks like Charlie and Duncan, who are both part of this work as well. We're all working together, so we're all collaborating to make this happen. But we have public health, we have privacy and consent, payer work group, consumer work group, and pharmacy. But we're not trying to do things like what Da Vinci is doing or FAST is doing. We're trying to do things that are complementary. So just wanted to kind of lay those out. Next slide. The I think of HL7 Da Vinci Trebuchet as really demonstrating what fire exchange is happening. You're doing the real work on the ground between payers and providers to be able to work at scale. You've got to have that trusted exchange. You've got to have trust built in. Leveraging HL7 fire implementation guides gives everybody the same rules of the road. I don't know if everyone realizes, but you've seen some recent numbers for Tufka. Over 1 billion has been exchanged, but the Care Quality Network is exchanging over 1 billion every month. So it's not a problem of data moving, it's how good is the quality of the data. So that's why we continue to harp on this, literally. Next slide. Data usability work group, if you go to the next slide, is chaired by Dr. Phil Beckett from the Texas Health Services Authority, PhD doctor, and Dr. Bill Gregg from HCA Healthcare. So all of you should know who that is, or at least the organization. They keep me honest on what we try to do. And if you go to the next slide, what we're really trying to show here is the history. Started in 2020. We published Implementation Guide version 1 in 2022, December. We actually got AHIMA on board to start us helping. We didn't want this guidance to sit on a shelf and collect dust. We wanted it to be adopted. So we brought AHIMA on board to help us spread that word and created a community of practice known as Data Usability Taking Root. Our second guide, version 2.0, came out in December of 2024 from the work group. And then we now are looking at putting out a 2.1 version. So that's kind of the timeline of where we're going, or where we've been and where we're going. Next slide. If you go to the next slide, we're going to kind of talk about the implementation guide itself. So the implementation guide, if you're not familiar, is about 60 something pages long. I know it's still 60 pages, but it's focused on topics. And so there's a table of contents, and each topic category, if you look to the right side, data provenance and traceability of changes. You're going to hear from both Duncan and Charlie about how, that's important to maintain trust, for instance. We focus it on data integrity, format, and trust. That's really where we put the patient matching stuff that aligns. We point to the FAST work. So we're trying to put the breadcrumb trail in place for all of these standards that folks need to be aware of with true conformance requirements. You shall do this, you should do that, or you may do this. If you go to the next slide, well, each of those chapters, those seven that I mentioned, all of them focus over an arching of use cases, provider, provider to public health, or healthcare entity to consumer. And I know the elephant in the room is where's payer? Everyone asks, why do we not have a payer use case? Because we think Da Vinci is doing a fabulous job. But that doesn't mean we don't sprinkle things into the guide where appropriate, like data tagging, if there's something we can pull out, things like that, the consent work from FAST, things like that. So each of those chapters have a problem statement, use cases, the standards that we're pointing to, the shall, should, may guidance itself, and then future efforts, kind of the parking lot, what we haven't tried to solve yet, but we know we want to at some point. If you go to the next slide, what we tried to do is align all this with government and industry standards. So these are all the works that we're trying to tie together. Direct trust we point to. Of course, we elevate work that AHIMA is doing as well. We've been working with CLIA for the laboratory chapter that we have. So trying to make sure that we pull the regulatory requirements in with the interoperability requirements. Next slide. So again, we want to make sure the challenge is solved. So if you go to the next slide, we wanted to make sure you guys see, resources. If you're interested in following the work group itself, there's a whole link of resources there. So if you go to the next slide, it's free to follow. We have quarterly meetings once every quarter. This is the timeline that we have. Our next meeting will be in August next month, and we're going through the phases. So right now we've gone through the administration and prioritization for the 2.1 that we're expecting to put out next year. So this is kind of giving you the phases of what we're going to be doing. Phase one, we've just finished. We are now in phase two, where we're actually developing the guidance, what's going to go into 2.1. Phase three will be a public comment phase. So we're going to release this in November with a workshop that we'll have November 17th. And then we're going to put it out for public comment from November through January. And we're going to put the final publication with the comments resolved by March of 27. So just wanted to let you know this is work going. Next slide. So again, we wanted this to take root. We don't want this to collect dust on a shelf. So if you go to the next slide, we wanted to partner and think about this as a community of practice. How do we bring real implementers to give us the feedback who are truly implementing this work? And I'm proud to say both Charlie with clinical architecture and Duncan with Smile are true, pledged organizations to this community as well. So, again, we're stronger together. We have to work together on all this. So next slide. The work group I've talked to you about, the stuff on the left side of this, we do have 400 organizations with 500 or over 500 participants itself. They don't come to all the meetings, but they follow the work. The Taking Root movement is roundtables. We have quarterly discussions. We have technical assistance we provide to those pledged organizations. I have one-on-one calls to help them as they need. Testing platform that we offer, don't need to have a requirement, but things like what Charlie's doing with the PIQI framework supports us as well. So if you think about the rubrics he's going to talk about, it actually shows a way to put a bar of what is it that you're measuring. And then trying to do in-person convenings where appropriate. For instance, we'll have a roundtable discussion at our annual meeting in October. And so the pledged organizations are either implementers or supporters or a sponsor in AHIMA's place. Next slide. These are the organizations who have pledged minus 3 federal agencies, the Social Security Administration, or 1 state and 2 federal. So the Social Security Administration, the Veterans Administration, and then we have the Texas Public Health Department that are not listed on here. But these are the pledged organizations that have been helping us. And for instance, Civitas, we are in, meeting with their folks and helping them along the way as well. So next slide. Taking root meetings, these are the ones that have happened and the ones that are coming, and the summit and the workshop dates. So next slide. We really wanted to let you guys know there's a whole wealth of workshop information from last year's workshop, which covers the whole 2.0. We have wonderful panelists. Charlie had one of his folks join, and we had some dialogue and a moderated session. So there's all the recordings available at this link. If you go to the next slide. This is also kind of the laundry list of if you need to get hold of us or have any kinds of questions about the Sequoia project, interoperability matters, the taking root movement, the data usability work group itself, all of the contact information is here. So with that, I think I turn it over. Um, oh, yeah, next I'll turn it over to Duncan. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much, Dee. That was awesome. I'm Duncan. I'm one of the founders of Smile Digital Health and the CEO. My approach on this conversation, can we go to the next slide, please? My approach on this conversation is going to be driven by kind of walking through a number of ways to look at the idea of usability and transformation as the uh, world we're in changes towards a more interoperability by default kind of experience. So we're going to start with sort of talking about why now, and I'm going to steal shamelessly from Trebuchet there because I think you guys did a great job. We're going to talk about scaling FHIR, which is what FAST is all about. The FHIR Scale Task Force really is focused on thinking about how do you scale and drive the ability to connect to each other and to derive value from those connections at layers which are, when you have hundreds or thousands of participating organizations, and what would you have to have in place as infrastructure to make that work. Then we're going to talk a bit about networks, and I'm going to touch on it. And then finally, I'm going to spend a bit of time on field lessons, because over the years, we've had a number of experiences that kind of are relevant for where we're going to be looking at interoperability and usability going forward. And so maybe we could go to the next slide. I can sort of touch on the why now. So I shamelessly stole this slide from Trebuchet. I think it's an excellent slide, and it covers the core reasons for now well. So I'm not going to repeat back to you the details of your slide because I know this audience mostly from Trebuchet, but I'm going to talk about it from the way that we at Smile and FAST see this problem. Historically, when you think about the use of information and interoperability, it's driven by specific use cases. Someone says, I need to be able to do this thing, so I have to get this class of data from all these sources around the place. And the data was gathered for different purposes, and then you try and massage it into a set of use cases that take that data and modify it for purpose. I don't think that we're in that world. I mean, we're still in that world. I'm going to talk about that, but I think we're trying to move away from that world to a world where we all have similar use cases and similar data models, and we're trying to align on the use of those of the data and the mechanism of the user experience in the application. And so where we're headed to in terms of the future is being driven by the stuff that Trebuchet is doing today, getting people connected, being able to demonstrate how regulation plays into it, being able to show the value prop to clinicians and to payers and others, and then driving a consistent use of information across a number of use cases is exactly where we need to get to. And I think as we move to the future, what we're going to see is the number of use cases expand and the consistency of data become even more important. And then at the root of that is going to be the usability of that information to support those use cases. And so we're going to talk a bit about that at the end when I talk about some of the experiences we've had. Next slide, please. So basically the thesis is this, right? Standards are the key to data exchange, and then scaling is the way to get broad value out of those standards, right? And we've been able to demonstrate so far that we can do this type of exchange, and it's been an ongoing process ever since the mid 2010s, right? We've had the requirement for effective use of information in healthcare, and we've been getting better and better at sharing that information and making it available. And so we're pretty good at the ability to show that we can exchange information. And I think FHIR represents the culmination of that effort. I think it's the best and most effective standard we've had. It's why Smile uses it. And I think that with that in mind, really where we have to get to is the next layer, the usability of the information, the usability of the processes, and then the outcomes of the workflows. And so, if you think like we share information, make sure the data is good and it's got the level of quality necessary for the work being accomplished. Make sure that we've got proper security and access to the information, and we're understanding the character of the information, and ultimately, workflows like prior auth or data exchange, provider exchange, and there's a number of these workflows coming in, and in the future you can imagine there's going to be more. That process is exactly what we're talking about, and I think where we are now on this is somewhere in the middle of this workflow, right? I mean, we've got and the FHIR Scale Task Force identity, we've got the idea of consent, we've got the idea of security, we've got provenance, we've got testing, we have all of these capabilities. And what we want to do is demonstrate that those ultimately drive effective workflows. And so working with DaVinci and working with others is a really great way to sort of demonstrate that future. Next slide, please. So here's an example workflow, right? So, and everybody here probably is familiar with the DaVinci prior authorization burden reduction sort of workflows. So, coverage requirements, then documentation and templates, then the prior authorization support, and then ultimately, status exchange, and finally, really important, measuring if we're effective in what we're doing, and then being able to feed back into the system and improve it. And so those classes of workflows have cross-functional engagement. You think about the character of this, and we're no longer talking about send me data so that my workflow is going to be improved. We're talking about a payer and a provider integrating in a way that the provider says, are you going to pay for this? The payer says, can you give me the information about it? The provider fills out some content. The payer renders a decision. The provider gets the output, may dispute the decision, whatever it happens to be, and comes back through. And eventually we evaluate that entire system together to say, are we doing it right? And then we improve the overall workflow. It's not like the old character of interoperability, right? This is bidirectional and multi-party. I think it's really important to understand how we're moving forward from that idea of exchange through operations. Next slide, please. So the FireScale Task Force has a number of work groups. We have the directory services, which are provider directory services. We have identity, which is for the ability to track who's engaging in the services. We have consent, which I think is a growing and really important concept, especially in a world in which information is becoming more ubiquitous and the ramifications of the distribution of information are becoming more serious. Security is obviously a key goal of any large integrated system. Testing is a new idea that is worth exploring in depth. Yeah, when I say testing a new idea, what I mean is as an element of ongoing operational standards, the idea that we can have mechanisms baked into the creation of standards that enable everybody to validate that they're following the standard properly. And then fast tracking interoperability as a consequence of all this. Next slide, please. So security, where we're going with that in the FireScale Task Force is focusing on UDAP, and the goal being, so if you think about, and the reason I'm going to touch on all these things to sort of explain our logic and our thinking around this. Everybody is welcome to go and explore the FireScale Task Force documentation, look at our IGs, and get into more depth. But at a high level, the idea behind security is that while the existing models for OIDC are great for individual transactions, the ability to ramp that up so that multiple organizations can participate seamlessly in a trusted framework together, we have to have some mechanism to manage registration and to improve the process by which organizations establish trust and exchange information. So we've landed on UDAP as the strategy for that, and I think we're seeing that getting tested today, well, in a variety of settings. Next slide, please. So identity and matching, this is a well-established problem, right? You think about the constant discussion of EMPI and MDM inside healthcare over the past 20 years. I think by establishing some very high-level principles around the ability to develop assurance for identity, the ability to determine what identifiers are necessary, the ability to identify what demographic components are required. If we standardize on that, everybody walks into the attempt to deal with who are you looking at? Is that the same person I'm looking at? Through the same lens. And so the whole goal of FAST in this particular case is to give everybody a level playing field and to standardize on existing working models. And with that in mind, we're partnering with DaVinci and others to get the right characteristics identified. And so we have a work group associated with that, and we're seeing that roll out effectively in the various testing scenarios. Next one. The directory is central to everything going on in provider identification. Currently, there's a number of discrete provider directories that are in use. The goal is to end up with one national provider directory that is usable by all parties. We've already issued a version of the directory implementation guide, and it's being refined for the future. The goal obviously is that everybody can try and look at a provider and then be able to participate in in clinical transactions or business transactions with those providers. And then the overall national directory ecosystem has a layer of consistency as you go up and down the chain, right? You can imagine that a national provider directory has to play nicely with regional provider directories, has to play nicely with specialty provider directories. And we're really thinking through what does that mean to have a consistent strategy across all of those. We can get into more details about that, but if you'd like, we can have further discussions in the future about the national provider directory. Next slide, please. Consent, this is a critical component. When we brought it in, it was the thing that had the largest uptake from a population perspective. It's clearly a need because as you start thinking about the different regulations in different milieus and locations, the idea of how your information is going to be used has material consequences. There are regulatory differences for populations in different states, and the implication of the use of that information can go well beyond clinical consequences into legal consequences. And so the idea of consent is to make it possible for healthcare to participate in shared information in a way that is sensitive to the different ecosystems that care is delivered in. Next slide, please. So I'm going to touch on these two, but we've got way better experts here. So Didi already talked about the Sequoia taking root. We're going to be talking about PIQI after my presentation. But the point here is everything that we're doing is part of a continuum, and there's no one way to have scalable standards. You have to have a community all moving to the same goal with similar vision. And so really what we're talking about here is the importance of community and process. And everybody on this call is part of the community. And subsequently, this is a growing community. We're going to see this as an ongoing trend in the delivery of interoperable care. Next slide, please. I want to talk briefly about provenance. When I was at Sequoia's conference last year, we were talking about what was important. This was in the usability group. It was a larger usability conference. And the idea of provenance came up as central to everybody's goals. And this goes to the root of the importance of trust in an interoperable world. It's hard to frame it with sufficient weight. If you can't trust your data, you're going to go and do the research again. You're going to do all of the work again yourself. And to determine trust of information, you need to know where it came from and who is participating in the creation of it. Not all information is created equally, and not all uses of information have the same dependency on accuracy and quality. Provenance is critical in establishing the combination of trustworthiness, effectiveness, and ultimately decision-making capability. And so as a core element of what we're trying to accomplish in a interoperable ecosystem, we really need to know who is responsible and why they created the data, and then how old that data is, and all of the necessary attributes associated with information to be able to make it viable for the future. And so when we're thinking about information as a community, we should be putting provenance as a class 1 element of our thoughts, and make sure that everybody who gets engaged with this makes the point of recording who and where and why they got the information and what it was collected for, so that others can make use of it effectively. And I think this is going to become a larger issue as we go forward and we become more dependent on the data for real world clinical practices. I'm going to talk about that in the next layer coming up. Next slide, please. So interoperability, when you think about it, obviously we've got these great standards and this ability to share information, but we can't get there while we're still struggling with how do I find the people that I want to share with. And so what we've seen recently is a real focus on providing mechanisms that centralize the routing of information requests to each other. I don't know that we're going into a world where the old paradigm of messaging is the best version of it, but I think the idea of finding mechanisms to route real-time requests and then keep messaging as a component are really what we're going to have to accomplish together. I think TEFCA and CMS Aligned Networks are doing a great job of this. I think there's obviously more to come. We're certainly, at SMILE, pledged to participate in these, and we believe in the value of them highly. Next slide, please. All right, so this is probably going to slow down a bit. I'm going to try not to take too long, but I want to sort of dwell on a couple of things here. So all the stuff I've been talking about has a theoretical component to it, right? Ideally, if we were able to exchange information with trustworthy participants and we have good provenance, we're able to achieve the outcomes we want. The reality is that all of these ideas that we're talking about are getting proven by excellent participants like Trebuchet and others, but are stretch targets. Today, what I experience when I'm building things in the world are that the older standards prevail, right? When you're talking about health data, EDI is critical, and there's lots of CDA out there, and HL7 version 2 is, ubiquitous when dealing with EMRs. There's this real need to try and get things into consistent and use case what's the right word? Use case neutral data models, right? The idea that what we're doing is we're trying to get a consistent agreement on what the use cases are and then a consistent strategy for data, but the data has to come first, right? So we're trying to drive the real world data model. That's why we've landed on FHIR together, and then we're building use cases on top of it. That is not how it is today. Today, we have to map everything, and we are always pushing into the FHIR standard, and then we're able to do things. So when you're thinking about how you're going to participate from a usability perspective and from a use case perspective, you have to start from the idea that data is not yet normalized, and that is still our number one goal, is to get everybody on the same page as the data model is the driver for healthcare. When you make someone change their workflow, this is moving on from like that data. So now you've got the data, you've normalized it, and you go into an organization, you say, I would like to change your workflow. I had a very wise clinician say to me, if someone wants the outcome and wants to change their workflow, making the tasks to change the workflow are very, very hard and prone to failure. If there's even some hesitancy, they're guaranteed to fail. You have to make sure that any change you're making to workflow is so well received that you're going to get there, or you have to make sure your transformation fits into workflows that are meaningful and improves those workflows in place. And an example of that would be the prior authorization. If people are used to clicking on a website for prior authorization, you have to continue to support websites because they do things that way. Even if you've got a really clever API in the background that maybe is ready to work with their EMR, until they're ready to work with their EMR, that transformation is not going to happen, and you have to support multiple pathways. The goal is to make it so good, and this is the part at the bottom here, which is when you get it right, the results are dramatic and transformational. So think about the case that I was just describing, where you've got prior authorization. Once they understand that they don't have to do that anymore, because within their EMR, that work is happening in the background almost, right? You can imagine in the future where the data exists in the EMR and it goes out to the payer and says, hey, I'd like to do this transaction. It pulls back a template that says, you need to give me these things for the authorization. It automatically populates that data and then negotiates AI to AI with it, and then just comes back to the doctor and say, yeah, proceed, go ahead. That point, the doctor is going to say, this is the best invention since sliced bread, and I love it. And then you will find that it takes off and everybody goes down that path. That's what we're trying to get to together, that deep beneficial transformation. And I think we're going to see that, but we have to go in eyes wide open, recognizing that the transformation doesn't happen automatically. You have to get it right, and you have to not break workflows. I think if you think about the character that we're talking with our friends at Sequoia, usability dovetails 100% with the FHIR standard because it comes across with the same characteristics, right? It talks about structured data and properly tagged data and properly normalized terminology and all the things that make information meaningful. And that characterization is really what's necessary for us to move forward. So I think what we've seen is nowhere we go is that ever already ready for us. As we do our deployments, people start to see the value of it. And we've had a lot of Sturm and Drang and gnashing of teeth in the process of getting there because it's hard. And in the early stages, all of this work to normalize data is not obvious for people. And so they're putting all this effort into a thing, and we'll talk about it on the next slide. And they don't often see the results in the short term. We're finally at the stage as a community where the results are going to start to show. And I think prior authorization is going to be one of the ones that's beneficial for everybody and really sort of hammers it home. So let's talk about selected examples. So this one was a personal one. Ontario Health, we normalized in Ontario labs, drugs, diagnostic imaging, acute care encounters, e-referrals, and a bunch of other things. And we put it all together into a common portal experience for providers because their EMRs were hard to integrate with. And what happened was we took workflows that were previously 5-day workflows to go and gather this data down to a real-time interaction online. And everybody hated our guts because it took 45 seconds instead of what they were used to with it being 1 second for Google. right? So the usability characteristic on this, it wasn't that we were fixing a thing that was many days of effort. It was, well, I've decided I want this in my workflow real time during clinical care, and now you're way out of line. And they got very angry. So it took us months and months to figure out how to solve some of the problems associated with the performance of this very complex data set we were making available to them. But once it was made available to them, it became essential to their workflow. And today you couldn't pry it from their hands. In fact, we're in the process of revisiting how we transform this. And it was very clear any interruption to the information available to all the clinicians in real time will be very, very poorly received. And so now we have to make sure it's an ongoing capability. Another example that we're all familiar with, the 2021 patient access mandate. Like that was wildly successful. We were able to very rapidly roll out, like for example, Smile, we had 12 large payers on the same day go live. It's crazy. We never see anything like that. And it turned out to be less well received than we expected. We did all of this work and everybody got involved with it. And because we hadn't really thought through how does the patient engagement work and what are we doing and how are we making this valuable and the consistency of testing, it turned out, when I talked to the payers who got involved, many of them say, we spent a lot of money on this, we're not seeing the rewards, but they're starting to now, right? And so this is where the usability and the pathway forward, what we actually did was lay the groundwork for the transformation. And now when we talk about using FHIR for prior authorization, and when we talk about using it for HEDIS, and we're talking about using it for all these other things that are meaningful to payers, they get it because they've gone through this effort of doing the normalization before. So I think what we need to remember when we're doing this is we're not always going to have a win up front, but if we're smart and we're thoughtful, we will eventually get to the win. Both of those first two cases are examples of that. I want to pick an example that is in that same model when I talk about the use of phone records. All of us, I think, in this group probably have some version of their health data associated with their phone. I know I regularly consult, even if it's not the clinical record, I consult things like sleep, steps, and others on my devices. And I see everybody else doing the same type of thing. So what we're seeing is that when you get the information people want in a model that people want, you get broad adoption, you get broad integration. And now we're starting to see these devices come to the core of implementation. People have with their phones the ability to work with their hospitals, and that pattern of use has had real world health outcomes and improvement. And I think when we think about what we're trying to accomplish for interoperability, there's a great point there, right? When you do Apple Healthcare, they still make you log into your hospitals and find your data. But once you've done it once, it's now working on your phone. You're able to have a consistent set of views. And that model, driving people to do that, has forced other people to do the same thing. If you look at what BeWell is doing and others in this space, it's really impressive. And so I think what I'm trying to drive here in sort of the discussion is this idea that we're not preordained to not drive value. There are real world examples that give us hope and give us a path to go. And the last one, open evidence, is the one I want to point to for real transformational value, right? This was put for doctors, and doctors use it constantly now. It's not perfect, and it doesn't solve all of the problems. But if you've got a complex case and you want to understand something, you can go and take a copy of your information, put it into open evidence, and it comes back with a great set of differential diagnostics. It gives you insight and value. And every doctor I know uses it. In fact, it's to the point where I was looking at people on stage at the eHealth conference in Halifax a month ago, and one of the doctors said, my patients are coming in better informed than I am because of their interactions with LLMs. Our goal as clinicians is to work now with these models to help patients navigate their care. The system is so good that we're getting the value back from it to be able to deliver meaningful outcomes. And so I'm just wrapping up, Casey. This is the last my last bullet. This is a pathway forward that we can all engage with. So wrapping up as Casey requested. Next slide is for PIQI.
Thanks, Duncan. Charlie, do you want to share your slides for this portion?
Yeah, it'll save me for having you slog through all my crazy animation.
Okay, thanks.
But I'm ready. Hi, everybody. I'm Charlie Harp. I'm the CEO of Clinical Architecture and co-chair and founder of the PIQI Alliance. For clarity, I'm a software engineer by background. I've been developing systems in healthcare for almost 40 years. And I started a business in 2007 because I knew we were on the brink of meaningful interoperability. So I'm an optimist also. I'm here today to talk about the Patient Information Quality Improvement Framework, or PIQI. And it is pronounced PIQI, just like being picky, being a picky eater. We should be picky about our data. And PIQI is an open, common approach to measuring and improving healthcare data quality. So let's talk a little bit about where PIQI came from and how it fits into the big picture of interoperability in healthcare. So the objective of healthcare interoperability, as I see it, is making the right information securely available to whoever needs it to make a decision, regardless of where that information originated in a usable form. And when you think about what Sequoia is doing about creating agreement, creating objectives, getting together, convening groups to decide what and how we should do things, that's a very important part of us collaborating together to solve this problem. And when you look at the advent of FHIR creates a standard upon which we can all seize and use to normalize how we package and exchange information with each other for a given use case or given use cases. And FAST is really about how do we operationalize that? Because it's one thing to have a package in a standard format. It's another thing to figure out how to get it from point A to point B in a way that we can use it meaningfully. The problem we have today is that we still are in a situation that when we get the information, we're not always confident that the view is worth the climb. And I think today, a lot of the interoperability we do is still what I would consider to be an artistic success. Because when I talk to folks and we do an annual data quality survey, the number of people who are willing to just start to accept and rely upon the data that they get through interoperability channels is not high. And that's because we still have this qualitative issue in the data that we share with each other through these channels. So the question is, how do we get to a point where the view is worth the climb? And that is where PIQI comes in. So PIQI's goal is measuring quality of data to ensure that it deserves the trust being placed in it and giving the ecosystem a shared objective way to know that. And also, when your data is not good, what's wrong with it exactly? In fact, people think of PIQI as a scorecard for data quality, but it's much more than that. The second I in PIQI is about improvement. So not only does it score the data, it's got to show the work and explain to you what you can do to uplift the data to make it usable. And so the idea is PIQI as a mechanism for measuring data quality and fit for use. If we can plug that into an ecosystem where we have entities like the Sequoia project, standards like FHIR, collaborations like FAST, and then we evaluate and iteratively improve what we're exchanging with each other, we can get to the point where the view is worth the climb or the juice is worth the squeeze. It really depends upon which metaphor you want. So when I started designing PIQI back in 2023, I had a core set of design principles because what I didn't want to do is reinvent the wheel. And so those design principles at first was establish a simple use case oriented information model to support standard processing. And what was important about this it wasn't that I was rejecting FHIR as a standard. It was I wanted to create a standard way of measuring quality that did not rely on the universal adoption of FHIR. Because we have a data quality problem right now. And that data quality problem exists in OMOP. It exists in HL7v2 messages. It exists in CCDA messages. It exists in X12 transactions. So the idea wasn't that I wanted to just measure the quality of data in FHIR. I wanted to take the data out of the payload and measure the data on its own without worrying about a specific format. The next thing was wanted to have some way where we could establish a taxonomy to try to understand the root cause of the types of issues we're seeing. And there's a lot of stuff that's been written over the years, a lot of scholarly papers written on data quality. There's the ISO 8000 standard. My goal was to take the things that I saw over the last 40 years in healthcare, specifically around patient information, and really focus in on the things that we meaningfully exchange and make it very pragmatic and very practical. And so we built a healthcare data quality taxonomy around those principles. The next is for this to be something where instead of people writing code to do quality checks or validating things against a particular schema, I wanted to create modules, simple assessment modules that are modular, shareable, and understandable, and they could be arrayed against different types of data, so we didn't have to keep inventing new types of measurement. We could take a standard way we measure some of these things and apply it across multiple models and multiple use cases. And the last item is a concept of an evaluation rubric. Measuring data quality is not a new idea. People have been doing it for a long time. I've heard people say, Charlie, I have 8,000 data quality checks. That's great. But what we need is something that is objective, not subjective, something that is not schema dependent. When we're exchanging information like problems, lab results, medications, the question is, how can we have something where you and I can speak the same language when it comes to quality? So quality isn't an adjective like a quality used car. It's a noun, it's measurable, and it's something that I can point to regardless of who measures the quality and see the same score on the same payload. So in the beginning, when I started all this, I didn't want to reinvent didn't want to reinvent formats in healthcare. So, but I wanted something simple. I wanted something that also had a baked-in use case. And so what I landed on was USCDI. So USCDI version 3 was where I started, and I created basic data classes and attributes based upon the USCDI data classes and elements. So that was kind of the original model for this because it's flat, it's hierarchical, it has classes and attributes, and that's what kind of gave birth to the first PIQI clinical model. Since then, we've iterated on that in the work groups with folks from ONC and the VA and CDC, and we've got like the actual release version of 1.0 is out there today, and it does kind of align. It's kind of USCDI version 3 plus, but it is out there and it does work very well with HL7V2, FHIR, and CCDA, and OMOP for that matter. And in the claims space, in the payer space, we've also stood up a work group and we've developed our first version of an EOB model, which is based upon Karen Blue Button FHIR profiles. And so that is also out there. We just finished testing it at the CMS Connectathon, and we'll be doing more testing at the next Connectathon in September. Love to see you there. So that was the first principle, is we needed a way to flatten the data and evaluate it from a data quality perspective. The next thing was the taxonomy. And so the taxonomy that we built falls into 4 categories: availability, accuracy, conformity, and plausibility. Once again, focus in on these things that we see over and over again in healthcare or healthcare related data. And availability is really the concept of, is the data there? Is it have all of its parts? Or is something missing, like obviously missing, which is slightly different than unpopulated. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but feel free to message me if you're curious. The next is accuracy. Is the data in the right format? Is it the right type of value? Is it the right type of grouping or not? The next is conformity, and this is all about codes because we love codes in healthcare. So the question is it a valid member of the code system that it purports to be a member of? Is it compatible? Is it what we said we were going to exchange with each other? Is it a LOINC code, for example? And the next is it obsolete? Is it a current code? Because code currency, depending upon the timing of a transaction, can have a big impact on what happens with that code if you're trying to leverage ontologies that have a certain timestamp on them. And then the last is plausibility. And plausibility is really where you look at the data and you say, yeah, the data looks fine from a coding and a format perspective, but I don't think this could happen. I don't think that you could have this patient with this condition for whatever reason. I don't think the patient had an encounter 3 months after they passed away. So it's the ability to look at data. And another way to look at this is what it's like what I tell my kids. If you can get through the first 3, it's like eating your vegetables. If you can eat your fruits and vegetables, then you can have dessert. So plausibility is kind of the dessert where you get to do really interesting things that, they're not quite clinical decision support. They're not quite clinical quality measures, but what they're really doing is saying, hey, there's something weird going on with this data that could indicate that I'm missing a decimal place, I mapped something incorrectly, or I merged the wrong patient data into this picture. So the next thing is this concept called a simple assessment module. A simple assessment module is essentially a little mechanism that does a thing. You give it a facet of the model, whether it's an attribute, a data class element, or the entire model, and it returns a simple, it passed the test, it failed the test, or I didn't perform the test because it didn't meet the conditions of the test. That allows us to take the output of these assessments and do a simple numerator denominator score. So once again, we try not to be too fancy. We try to say I did 1,000 tests on this data. It passed 900 of those tests. And the last is a simple assessment module can also have a dependency. For example, well, I'm going to get into some examples, so I won't get ahead of myself. And they can be simple, like, is the field populated? Or they can be complex, like, did the patient have a mammogram after a double mastectomy? And because those are things that look across data classes, you can factor in things like patient demographics. The idea there is a SAM can be as simple or complex as you want, but it always returns a simple pass-fail result. And so here are some examples of some SAMs in PIQI. One is the attributes populated. The other is it's a valid date. Then you get into things that are codable concepts. The concept is complete. It's got a code system, a code, a display. It's valid. We checked it against a terminology server and it's a real code. It's active. It's compatible. We said LOINC code, you gave me a LOINC code. And then you have something like the lab result is plausible, where if we have a valid LOINC code and we have a unit of measure and we have the result value, I can go see if that result value is possible in a human being specimen. And if they're not, then it's not plausible. So when you look at these, each one of these takes in some type of attribute or element or concept from the model. It might take in parameters like the concept is compatible. You're going to say, here are the code systems that are in our contract that we agreed on. And then they can have prerequisites. For example, for a concept to be compatible, it's got to be valid. For it to be valid, it's got to have all of its parts. For it to have all of its parts, it's got to be populated. And the reason why this dependency is important is because when I say you have to give me a LOINC code, that's all I'm asking for. Give me a LOINC code. But if you fail along the path to me checking to see if it's a LOINC code, say it's not populated, then you didn't pass the test of it being a LOINC code, so you don't get your point. But the reason you failed wasn't because it wasn't a LOINC code. It was because it was unpopulated. And understanding how the failures and where the failures are occurring is important. And that's why every single one of these SAMs is also bound to a dimension in the taxonomy. So when the failures occur in an aggregate fashion, I can see that your biggest problem is you're not populating fields that are critical to what we're trying to do here. And that brings us to what brings it all together, and that's the evaluation rubric. So an evaluation rubric aligns these simple assessments to the PIQI model that you're using and configures them. It determines how you're scoring them in the model, and it's based upon the common understanding of quality requirements for the intended use case. So for example, I could create an evaluation rubric that's simple. We're sharing medication data, and all I care about is you give me an RX norm code. I could have a rubric that's as simple as that. I could have a rubric like the one we recently built with the folks at the PIQI Alliance and ONC, the USCDI aligned rubric, where we're saying, hey, to be compliant with the spirit of USCDI, here's what the data should look like in the payload. So you can determine if you're truly compliant with the intent of USCDI 3.1 or you're not. Doing the same thing with Karen Blue Button. So PIQI isn't a single standard scorecard. It's really a methodology for creating shareable scorecards. So when I say, how does your data do on the USCDI version 3.1 rubric, you can tell me, and I can verify that. So an evaluation rubric, basically, and here's an example for a lab test. it takes in the entities in the lab test, and it says for a lab test itself, it's got to be conformant with LOINC, and I'm scoring that. The perform date is a date in the past, and I'm scoring that. The result value should match the type if it has a type association. And the result value, if it's qualitative, should be a SNOMED code. The result unit should be in the UCOM nomenclature. The specimen type should be a SNOMED concept. The lab result status, it just needs to be populated with something. And the lab element, the result unit should match what the LOINC code expects. So if you're giving me a mass concentration LOINC code, you should have a mass concentration result unit. Now for this last one, I'm not necessarily going to take away points for that. I just want to know how often that's happening so I can take a look at that. And that's another thing about PIQI. PIQI, you can decide if you're scoring something or not scoring it. You can even weight things, which I don't recommend, but you can. But you can also just evaluate what's happening. So you might say, hey, right now I care about USCDI version 3.1, but I want to put things in place to see how my data would do when USCDI version 4 hits the streets. So it gives you the ability to score and also assess what could be coming down the pike or just satisfy your curiosity. And like I said, you can weight things. And we also have this notion of criticality, which is if you have a score of 90%, that's great. But if that 90% includes failures that are of a critical nature, that's not as great. And so the assessment process, and I know I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to go fast. Not fast, but fast. You have the data input, you normalize it to the model. The model goes against the evaluation rubric you selected. It comes back with a scorecard through the engine. And that way, on an individual message, you can tell if that message is considered to be quality or not quality. And you can take the stats that come off that message and store them in your scorecard. An example of what this could look like is here. This actually came from Cynthia, but the data quality overall, 85%. If I look at the individual data classes, you can see they range from 35% to 100%, some with 100% clean records. And at the failure level, you can see the places where demographics fail within the data set that I've looked at, in this case, for the last available 30 days. The PIQI Alliance, and you scan the QR code if you want. It's a community of practice where we have work groups that work on taking this and evolving this standard as a community. And it's got great people involved. It's got CDC, ONC, Social Security. We've been getting them involved, and a lot of folks from across the healthcare verticals. We are also moving PIQI through HL7 ballot. The informative specification ballot is happening shortly. STU1 on the September ballot. You can check that out and work with us in the Connectathons. We'd love to have you there. My objective here is I think that when you look at these initiatives, and there are other exciting initiatives that are happening right now as well, together we can fulfill the dream of what interoperability was supposed to be by having the network and having the data that meets our needs to get things done. And that's me. Thank you.
Wonderful presentation by all. I would really love to see this potentially to Da Vinci Community Roundtable. Well, we're out of time for questions, but thank you all so much. And I will send the chat questions to you should you wish to respond to them. Yes, thank you so much. And then we'll get this recording posted on YouTube and it will be in our meeting minutes. So have a great day, all.
Thanks. Bye.